Hello and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host Rob. In today's video, we're going to be continuing my series on my Broken Lands campaign, and this is going to be our tier 1 type of play. I think we go a little past tier 1 in this video. We'll probably end at level 5 or 6, so technically into tier 2, but I just want the storyline to have a nice resolution, so it is what it is. Anyways, so just to recap, our characters in this campaign are Seven, the Warforged Artificer. We have Diza, who is a Aasimar Paladin. We have Krogel, who is a Rock Gnome Wizard. Eldon, the Halfling Rogue. And Philandros, who's also an Aasimar and is a Monk. The party had previously been captured. They didn't really have a choice in the matter. I just did a prologue. They booked passage on a ship, but the ship captain ends up drugging them all and selling them to slavers. And so when the adventure actually begins, they wake up, they're chained to the oars in this slave galley essentially. And of course they have no equipment. So the party, taking stock of the situation, they realize they're in some sort of slave ship. There's a bunch of other slaves with them as well that they don't even know, of course. And there's some guy with a whip and a dagger at his belt, and also a ring of keys. And so the party begin trying to plan their escape, of course. I'd also kind of told the players, as long as spells didn't require a material component, which of course they don't have, then I would allow them to cast them. Even if it required a somatic component, I felt like there's enough that they can, move their hands enough to cast spells. Unless, of course, it's a ritual spell or whatever else, because obviously you're not going to be casting with them with a minute or 10 minute or whatever casting time right in front of this dude at the whip, right? So the party come up with a pretty decent plan. Oh, I thought it was kind of funny. I had a bunch of NPCs in the ship, but one of them was this giant barbarian named Krell, and Krell's 6'9" or so. And so when he's pulling on the oar, Eldon is the guy right in front of him, and they're both on the same oar essentially. So Eldon would literally get or right beside him, I should say, not in front. And Eldon would get lifted off the bench sometimes. He's just dangling from the oar, which I thought was funny. But they begin working on a plan, and they feel Krogel decides to use one of his cantrips. I can't remember if it was Minor Illusion or Prestidigitation, but he uses some sort of effect to pull the slaver over to their location. And then Krell does the classic choke him out with your chains tactic, while Eldon gets the key ring and starts releasing all the prisoners. But while they're doing this, a couple more of the slavers come down because they hear some sort of commotion, and a fight breaks out. And while the fight's going on, the ship also crashes into some rocks, and part of the hull is actually broken, and water begins rushing into the boat. So they're kind of on a clock at this point, and things are starting to heat up already. So I was kind of hoping that we'd get this cool epic fight with lots of grappling and unarmed maneuvers and that kind of stuff, or people attacking people with improvised weapons and whatnot. But instead it was mostly a punch fest, which is a little unfortunate, except for Eldon, who managed to get the dagger from the guy with the keyring, of course. But the party manages to overpower and kill the other two guards that come down, and they manage to get up onto the top of the deck with a bunch of the prisoners to realize that out in the water there, they see the captain, the first mate, and a bunch of the crew members in a rowboat heading towards what they see to be a distant island. It's getting kind of dark, which explains why the pirate ship or the slaver ship had run into the rocks, of course. And the boat begins just breaking and splitting apart like Titanic style, right? Except, of course, there's no propeller for anybody to bounce off, so that's good news at least. At this point, the ship shatters and people are all thrown into the sea, and they're trying to find debris and stuff that they can use to help them float. Diza, of course, turns out she cannot swim. She would constantly remind the party of this every time they found water, by the way, because as I mentioned last video, Diza has short-term memory loss, like the guy from Memento. And so she doesn't remember telling the party 10 other times that she can't swim. But she almost drowns. So basically, I just required everybody to make 3 athletics checks to reach the shore. And they only had to pass 1. But if you failed 2 in a row, you also got a level of exhaustion. So hopefully you don't fail the first 2, because that's going to make getting to the shore much more difficult. So I had a big list of all the NPC names. I hadn't really given them a lot of personality or depth yet, because I didn't know which ones were going to live or die. But I had names, and then if they had a class on a level, which was pretty much always level 1, I wrote that down as well. So Diza almost drowns, but Seven comes back for her. Krogel, of course, cannot swim because he's a rock gnome, and despite being 3 feet tall, he weighs like, 200 pounds or whatever. But him and one of the NPC gnomes, who happens to be a bard, they managed to get a large chunk of wood, and them and a couple of the other survivors managed to like paddle it in towards the island. Krell the barbarian swims like he's a fish apparently, and Eldon just kind of holds onto the guy's neck, and he just like powers them both to the shore. But about half the NPCs don't make it. They just all drown. And the players do manage to save a couple here and there, but a couple of them couldn't even swim, so it was all they could do to really save each other. But anyways, they managed to get together with all the other party members and all the other survivors that they can find, and they all like group together on the shore. And at this point, it's getting quite dark. There's no sign of the pirate captain, or the slaver captain. I keep calling him a pirate, sorry. The slaver captain and his crew, but the party figured that they've probably just landed on a different part of the island. And they don't really want to explore the island in the dark because they don't really know what's going on or whether or not it's safe, right? So they make camp there on the beach, and they decide that in the morning they'll try to find out what they can find, right? So in the morning, though, they also realize that part of the ship is actually like lodged up against these rocks, and it's kind of rocking back and forth at the tides, right? And it's not like on the beach or anything, but it's not too far out to swim. So they decide that we should, go explore it in case maybe there's some supplies that might have survived, right? So a couple of them swim out as we split the party, and they managed to reach the ship. Fortunately, these guys had weapons, because they find two like basically Lovecraftian, like Cthulhu style Deep One fishmen on the ship, trying to like find stuff to eat, right? And like actually like gnawing on a couple of the dead bodies that are still there inside the ship, that couldn't make it out. The party managed to kill them, but it ends up being a pretty tough fight considering they have no equipment and just some crappy weapons they got from a couple of the slavers, right? Krogel sees what's happening, and he had not gotten out, but he manages to like get close enough that he can launch a couple spells and help out in that sense at least. And so they manage to kill the Deep Ones, and sure enough, they find a couple chests that have a bunch of gear. So they bring that stuff back, and the party's able to equip themselves with basically the starting equipment they should have had if their cruel and evil dungeon master hadn't taken it all away from them without ever giving them a fighting chance. So at this point, they're all equipped, and they decide to start trying to like figure out what to do next, right? Eldon, the rogue, decides to go explore the interior for a bit, and he's gone for several hours, but he finds this like kind of like this weird ziggurat temple, and there's like this statue of this like black giant bloated frog god creature thing that's like built on the top of it. And he realizes that this is the temple of the Deep Ones, and he sees some of the Deep Ones like at the temple and stuff, and he sees like this smoke coming from this fire on top, and he hears like drums beating, and every now and then a gong, and he's like, something tells me not all the other prisoners made it to our camp. Some of them might be here in the temple. And it's kind of funny because none of the other players are there, but a bunch of the players are like telling him he should go try to rescue these people. But once again, the party is split. It's just Eldon. And I'm not saying that wouldn't have been heroic, but I think he probably makes the right choice, because Eldon's a really stealthy, sneaky guy. I mean, he is a halfling rogue, what do you expect? But the prisoners aren't necessarily very stealthy. And even if he could have got in by himself without being detected, was he really going to be able to get them out? Probably not. However, I'll still make fun of Troy because, I wasn't particularly valorous. But hey, he's not lawful good anyway. He doesn't have to be valorous. I think he was like chaotic neutral or something, Or maybe chaotic good. I can't remember. Either way, he decides that discretion is a better part of valor, and he heads back to the camp, and he's like, do not go to the interior of the island. It is bad. Very, very, very bad. Do not go there. So the party decide to find the pirate captain and his crew, the slaver captain and his group, kill them and take their rowboat, which is probably the best plan they could have had. So sure enough, they begin exploring the perimeter of the island, and that evening, around just around dusk or supper time again, they come across the enemy camp. So the party began like trying to strategize. They want to try to pull off some sort of ambush, but of course, Krell the Barbarian decides that there's no honor to be had in some ambush. It's best to fight our foes head on. So he just like grabs his great axe and charges into the enemy camp. Anybody else is still kind of talking and planning, and then they're like, what? Go, go, go! Everybody go! Everybody go! So they all just go charging in, and it's just a complete mess. And Krell begins raging and just starts like killing some of the like low-level slavers that aren't really important. But he ends up just taking a ton of damage and almost goes down in the first round. He's down to like 3 hit points or something like that. The party get in there and start trying to help him. And the next round, Krell gets hit again, but because he's raging, he only takes half damage, of course. So he got hit for like 5, so it ended up being 2, of course. So he's still standing there with 1 hit point left. A bunch of the other NPCs are here helping the party, but they pretty much all got killed. The only other 2 besides Krell who live are the gnome wizard guy, or not gnome bard, who made it to shore with Krogel. He turns out to be a bard, like I mentioned. Oh, his lute was in one of the boxes as well, so he's able to play his instrument. And he doesn't really do anything at all in the fight. He just like sits like 30 or 40 feet away watching it. But he does heal Krogel when Krogel goes down in the fight. So it's not like he was worthless. He helps out. And then Phil goes down as well, and Diza the Paladin actually used to lay hands on him. It ends up being a pretty tough fight. But in the end, the party are victorious. They manage to kill everybody else. And then the only other NPC of worth, or, well, the only other one who lives, is an elven woman named Rhea, who we'll just call Rhea Nine Fingers, because she's missing the pinky on her left hand, like Yakuza style, right? Which is, of course, exactly what happened. She angered the Thieves Guild and lost a finger in retribution. She, of course, is a rogue and completely untrustworthy. But she does come along with the party and pulls them into some of her shenanigans. She's not really like the rob the party type, though. She's more like the long con type, right? So she has something else in mind. But anyways, in the end, the party is victorious. They kill the slavers. They take the rowboat, which is really designed for like about 6 people or so. But, you know, we got like 8. And they managed to kill a boar or 2. So they'll have some food and cook it up in the slavers' campfire. They managed to get all the fresh water they can get. And the slavers also have a compass and some navigational charts that they'd taken with them from the boat. So Rhea thinks that she can probably figure out how to get back to land, and that basically ends the first part of the adventure, right? So the next game, I don't make them roll for any of this stuff. We just assume that they were able to find land, because otherwise it's going to be a really short campaign. So they managed to get back to civilization. They ended up finding this highway and a merchant caravan, and the merchant leader is just glad that he's not being robbed, because he sees all these people with like armed to the teeth at this point, and he assumes that they're just up to no good. But they tell him they just want to work for basically for almost for free. They just wanted some like silver and stuff and some food, because they've used all their rations at this point from the Boers on the trip here, because it took them like 7 days at sea to get here, right? So he agrees, and they make their way to the city of Tartanmac. And Tartanmac is a big like commercial trade hub. It's known as the City of Trade. It's also, though, known as the City of Thieves. And Tartanmac has a lot of like political intrigue. There's a lot of assassinations. The Thieves Guild runs a lot of stuff. There's a very powerful underground movement. Sometimes the Thieves Guilds are even at war. And a lot of the cities in the Broken Lands are like independent city-states, essentially, right? So a lot of times there's like wars. In fact, there's pretty much always wars somewhere. Like as I mentioned in the last video, House Yen and House Yao are at war at the start of this adventure, right? And a bunch of the other city-states are always fighting or whatever. But Tartanmac is kind of like Switzerland. Like nobody really attacks Tartanmac. They just come there to like do illegal trading and businesses and launder their ill-gotten goods, just like Switzerland. So it's pretty much safe. They don't even have an army, which is probably a little stupid, but it is what it is. Oh, I should probably give credit for Tartanmac as well. That was a name I took from my friend Chris's adventure that he'd run for us 25 years ago. It was just called The Circle. It's one of the best campaigns I've ever been in. he had a city called Tardenmac, and it was this big trade city. So I stole the name from him. So Chris, if you watch my video, do not sue me, please. I've given you credit. Anyways, I just liked the name, so I decided to use it. I will also mention the party ends up meeting this one NPC, and he wasn't like a major NPC, but his story was pretty funny, I think. So I'm just going to relate the whole thing here so it's not all broken up over a bunch of different segments. Just realize that a lot of this stuff happens later on. You know, it'll make sense. So, but anyways, his name is Hasim, and Hasim runs what he considers to be the greatest menagerie in the world. Hasim's magnificent menagerie of 1,000 fantabulous delights. And his menagerie they have an elephant. They've got these weird striped horses from the Unsettled Expanse. He's got fire breathers and knife swallowers, and he's got jugglers and acrobats and tightrope walkers and, you know, all this crazy stuff. And Hasim wants the party to join his menagerie because he sees like this huge hulking barbarian guy. He sees like this exotic elf girl, because there's not a lot of elves in the Broken Lands. He sees like this, you know, the halfling and a rock gnome and some sort of like talking magical golem, as far as he can tell, because he doesn't even know what a warforged is, right? And you know, who wouldn't want to be part of his menagerie? I mean, it's the greatest menagerie on earth, you know. So he wants the party to join, but literally they have like no reason to want to be a part of it. And it was kind of funny because I could kind of tell that at one point they're like, are we supposed to be joining the menagerie? Like, there's no real like story reason. There's no quest or anything that we know of or anything. And so they're kind of confused. But thankfully, Troy, ever the goal-oriented individual in the group, was just like, no, this guy's just like a distraction. It's a waste of time. On the target, people. Stay on the target. You know. So they kind of get rid of Hasim, but Hasim is quite angry. He can't figure out why these people won't join his menagerie, and he like threatens to find. Oh, he also seems obsessed with if they have any like secret delights that he could add to the menagerie, right? Or maybe they know some sort of thing that they could add and have 1,001 secret delights now, or fantabulous delights, sorry. But the party just kind of blows the guy off, and he becomes quite angry. But they keep running into him every time they come back to Tardenmac. So at some point, the party has a bunch of money at this point. They all decide to buy things like horses. Eldon gets himself a pony because he's a little tiny little halfling. And Krogel, though, the rock gnome, decides no mere horse is good enough for Krogel. He decides to buy himself an elephant with like the big, like, you know, the palanquin or whatever it's called on the top, and he's gonna like just have this elephant and ride around in an elephant. Now, unfortunately, Krogel does not have the animal handling skill, so he just decides to hire as a permanent retainer this animal handler to drive the elephant and take care of the elephant for him. And I think he ends up paying this guy like more gold per year than he spent to buy the elephant in the first place. But this guy ends up being a great NPC as well. We'll talk about him at a later date. But it's pretty funny because the party come back to Tardenmac. They have like their elephant and they have all their horses and stuff. And they have a couple more NPCs with them at this point. You know, like all the original NPCs here at this point are gone. They've got other people with them. And they see Hasim again. And Hasim sees like the elephant and all the people on horses. And now he knows why they didn't want to join the menagerie. They're starting their own menagerie, and they're going to try to put him out of business. But nobody can beat Hasim and his marvelous menagerie of 1,000 fantabulous delights. So he just swears to put the party out of business instead. And at this point, like, they're all just thinking this guy's like the biggest idiot. And they just kind of find him annoying, right? But every time they come back, they keep meeting him somehow or another. And things just keep getting more ridiculous. So like the next time they come back, this is after they've met Xiaoling, and so they meet her. She's at this place called the Red Monastery, and the Red Monastery had been under siege by House Yao, and then she shows up. She wipes out the besiegers, liberates the monastery. Although liberate might not be the right word, because the monastery is also like Switzerland. It's always been neutral, and she's just like, no, mine now, mine, all mine. The monastery is now mine. And so now the monastery is hers, because Mike makes right. So she shows up with the party, because at this point they've joined up with her, and she's got like, 5,000 members of her army with her, which wasn't the whole army, of course, but she's got these 5,000 people, and all these like people from Tarmac, all the like trade guilds and stuff, all come like desperately riding out to the city to find out what's going on because they just see this army, where do they come from kind of thing. And, they're all upset that they're going to invade Tarmac. And do you have any idea what that's going to do to trade? How is anybody going to make money if we're under siege here, Don't you know how important making money is? That's what our whole city is founded on. So they managed to reassure these guys eventually, like, we're not here to invade. This is just like, she's like the leader of this giant house, and they weren't going to leave the army behind. And she's like, okay, tell you what, I'll leave the army behind. I'm just going to bring in my own personal bodyguard, right? And the nobles all, well, not really nobles, but the guild masters are all like, yeah, okay, that's fine. But then they realize that her personal bodyguard are these 50 soldiers with all their horses and their retainers, because you can't expect these guys to take care of their horses. So what do you think, they're servants? Of course not. They have servants to do that, and they probably have servants to serve the servants who are serving the horses. I mean, come on. So it ends up being like 400 people that come in because they've got so many retainers for all these guys. And they end up coming into the city, and of course they've got her like bodyguard, who are all these like mounted knights, right? And they've got all these banners and stuff everywhere. And she's got like this guy blowing a trumpet for just mostly because I thought it'd be funny if they actually had a guy blowing a trumpet. I don't know why he's even there, right? And then you got Krogel on the elephant, of course, right? And they come in, and there's all these people like rushing to the streets to see what's happening. There's this huge crowd. There's like a parade as they're like marching into the city here. And then at one point they just hear this like screaming, and they see this figure like push through the crowd. And of course, it's a seam, and he like falls to his knees, look at the heavens, and begins like ripping his robes, and he's like, how can I compete with this? He's like, oh, you've destroyed me, I now have to relocate. And so sure enough, Hassim packs up his menagerie and ends up leaving Tarmac to go to another city because he feels he can't possibly ever compete with the party. And I just thought it was kind of funny that at no point did they even, like, they're not trying to compete with this guy, and like, he's not even sure what's going on. He just thinks that, the imagination of what they were going to do to him was just so much worse than anything that actually happens. And they were joking at one point as well, because Krogel ends up summoning like a bunch of demons and binding them all. And he wanted to come into Tarmac with like, being carried on the backs of like all these demons and stuff. And but I was like, well, Hassim's already left town though. And they're like, oh, that's right, darn it. Like, we should find where he went now, because like, he goes from being this annoying NPC that they don't even want to see or deal with to being this guy they can't wait to like see him again so they can like torment him further. But anyways, enough about Hassim. Like I said, he's just a minor character in the grand story of things. Basically all the NPCs decide to go their own separate ways, except for Rhea Nine Figures, who has a particular mission she wants the party to help him with. Unfortunately, though, at this point, because of real-life scheduling, Troy wasn't able to play for a few weeks, so I decided to leave Eldon in Tarmac. And Eldon's actually from Tarmac. That's where he was actually born. And as I said, he's a member of the Thieves Guild, which is good, because the Thieves of Tarmac are definitely a powerful group. So I decided that he's going to just use his contacts in the Thieves Guild to try to find the ship captain who drugged them and sold them to the slavers to begin with. Because I thought that'd be a nice way to kind of wrap up this particular arc with them getting their revenge on the tyrant. Sorry, that was a Japanese metal reference. But anyways, get their revenge on the ship captain here, right? So, anyways, they end up leaving with Rhea. She informs them that she has a friend who's really more of a mark, and he's not exactly wealthy, but he's said to inherit a decent amount of money from his father, who is a successful wizard. And unfortunately, though, her friend kind of got himself thrown into this prison for public drunkenness, and because he doesn't have the money yet, he's not really able to pay the bail or anything else. So she wants the party to break him out of prison so that she can get the money from his inheritance from him, and then she offers the party, some money as part of the reward, right? So they're like, well, what the heck? Like, we've got nothing else going on. Let's go check it out, right? So he's in like this little village that's only got like 100 people in it or so. It's not like this is a, max security prison or something. It's literally like just a town jailhouse, right? So the party start trying to plan their jailbreak, but at some point one of them's like, well, how much is his bail? Like, maybe we can just pay the bail and free him that way. Sure enough, the bail is like 100 gold. So they pay the money and get him out. And he's quite grateful. He thinks the party all seem like really great guys. So he tells them, like, hey, actually, come with me and I can reward you all and pay you back the money that you so kindly spent for me, right? So they accompany him and Rhea to, I think his name is Kurtz. They accompany Rhea and Kurtz, and sure enough, they get to his father's estate. His father had passed away. That's how we knew he was getting inheritance. But he'd been in prison and wasn't there for the will reading. And sure enough, he has a sister named Esmeralda, and basically their father leaves everything to them. And so he has a, tidy sum of money, right? He agrees to pay all the characters a bunch of gold. I can't remember how much it was, like 200 gold each or something like that. Or maybe it was 100 each. I can't remember. But either way, they get, a decent amount of money. And they also get some other rewards. Krogel starts talking to Esmeralda. It turns out she's also a wizard in her father's footsteps. And her father had been doing research in this asylum, essentially, like an insane asylum. And so the asylum, unfortunately, there was like a riot and the place burnt down, killing most inmates and a bunch of the guards, and it was this huge tragedy, of course. And her father did not die there because this was like 2 years ago. But her father had a bunch of notes, and he always regretted that he thought the notes were probably lost, but he wasn't sure because he did have this metal case that he kept them in. And so she's like, you know what? Maybe you guys, I'll give you my father's spell book, and you go get me his notes, and I'm going to try to continue the work he was doing, right? And kind of a way to honor her father, right? And Krogel's like, spell book sounds good to me. So they end up having their cool mission, and it's basically like a haunted house mission, except they're in this burnt out asylum, and of course a bunch of the inmates are all there, and they're all like ghosts and specters and stuff, and it ends up being a lot of cool stuff. We actually find out that that place was lit on fire deliberately by the guards in order to stop the inmates from escaping and stuff. And in the end, they end up fighting a bunch of the specter ghost inmates and stuff. But they find her father's box and all the notes, and sure enough, they survive. They bring him back, get the spell book. You also have this other adventure in this lost city. I wouldn't say it was a great adventure, but it was okay. The highlights were that this place was also kind of like all the people there were basically slaves as well, and they're afraid to leave as well because there'd been this plague 10 or 15 years before, and they'd been told over the years now that most of the surrounding countryside was all dead. And it was only because of the magic in this city with the evil cultists that any of them were able to survive, right? And some of them haven't really been sure if this is true or not, but a lot of them just haven't really wanted to leave, even though they don't like their conditions, right? But they just think that maybe there's no world to go back to. So of course the parties show up, and they realize that, oh, there are people on the outside still that are still alive. They end up meeting the resistance, which is basically just this gnomish resistance movement, which is almost completely worthless. But the party does manage to help the resistance anyways. They think that the cultists are probably serving some sort of vampire or something, because every time somebody dies, they end up getting taken to the temple where the cult's headquarters are, and later the bodies are all drained of blood and stuff, right? So the resistance thinks that it's probably a vampire, but the party start getting some of that doesn't really seem to make sense. And one of the biggest clues is that vampires generally like living blood. Why would they be feeding on dead people, right? They could just be feeding on everybody in the town, right? So they're like, well, that doesn't really necessarily make sense. But they managed to get the resistance to light fire to, I think it was a granary or something, and that pulls a bunch of the temple guards away while they're trying to deal with the fire. And the party were able to sneak in through the back door and fight their way through the temple, which is now rather understaffed, of course, and finally come face to face with the cult leader and with this thing just called the blood vine, which is just this giant Venus flytrap thing that just sucks the blood out of all the dead people, right? And that's how it lives. It's just by drinking their blood, and it just swallows them kind of, and drinks the blood. It doesn't really swallow them, but just kind of pulls the blood out of their bodies and spits the bodies out, right? So they end up having their big fight. The party are successful in killing the cult leaders and destroying the blood vine. and they manage to free the city. And a bunch of the people in the city just decide they're going to just stay here. Some of them do decide to go back, but a lot of them think they're like, it's actually not a bad city, and they kind of like it here. They've been here all their lives in some cases, you know, because you got like, you know, generations of people that have been here at this point, right? And, you know, whatever, the party ends up freeing them. But mostly, I just like the resistance, because the party meets a couple other different resistance movements, and they're all just called the resistance. And they're all different movements, by the way. They're not like connected in any way. Just every single time they meet these like freedom fighters against tyranny, we are the resistance. And they're like, oh, not again. And every time the resistance is just weak and pathetic, by the way. But hey, that's why we need the player characters, right? If the resistance could do it all on their own, we wouldn't need the characters. But anyways, at this point, Troy is back, and so I determined that his character has indeed managed to find the ship captain and his connection to the slave lords. And this kind of ties into the old first edition Dungeons and Dragons Adventures, The Scourge of the Slave Lords. This was originally 4 different adventures. A bunch of them were tournament adventures as well. They were all from like Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, like first edition, right? And they do really show their age in some cases. And I didn't want to do the whole thing because it is fairly long, and you know, this was just like a minor detour at this point. This was like Act 1, right? But I did like a couple of things. They have a slaver's stockade. I figured that'd be like a good base for here. And then ultimately this would lead them to the slaver's stronghold, which would then lead to the party fighting the slave lords and hopefully destroying the slave lords and shutting down their operation for good, right? And liberating a lot of people on the way, of course. So sure enough, the party managed to find the stockade. They ambushed like a slave caravan heading to the stockade as well, which I thought was very clever. They released all the prisoners, of course. Well, I shouldn't say of course, because who knows what these guys are going to do. But they do release the prisoners, and in a rare fit of altruism, I guess. And they decide to do the whole Trojan horse maneuver. So they like put some of the characters in the cages and pretend that they're slaves, and the rest of them like drive the caravan. They get to the stockade, they get let in, and because the party has actually learned the names of some of the slave lords, including the guy who's running this place, whose name is Blue Cholts, and so they're able to like name drop some people, and they pass themselves off as having important information for Blue Cholts' ears alone, right? And so the guy's like, okay, that's possible, why not, right? So they decide to allow the party members into the stockade, and once again we managed to split the party because half of them are still in the cages. But they managed to basically like Eldon like lets the guys in the cages out, and they managed to overpower the guys who were supposed to take them away, and then they managed to like meet up with the rest of the party. They overpower the other group, and they continue to like fight their way in. They managed to like kill a bunch of the guards at this point, and have their ultimate showdown with Lord Blue Cholts, with the captain, whose name I can't remember, unfortunately. I remember the ship was called like the Sea Hag or something like that, but I can't remember the pirate or the captain's name, unfortunately. But anyways, the party managed to get their revenge. They managed to kill Blue Cholts. They killed the captain. They liberated a ton of slaves in the process, of course, and ended up basically just burning the stockade to the ground. And they managed to find the location of the slavers' secret base and begin their plans to make their assault there. Along the way, they do manage to kill another slave lord that they managed to find who wasn't with the other group. So that helps. That kind of evens the odds a bit more. Then when they're in the slaver base itself, they kill another one of the slave lords. So when they have the ultimate big showdown, there's actually the 5-player characters, and there's only 4 slave lords remaining. But the slave lords do out-level the party, so they don't outnumber them, but they are higher level. And one of them, let's see if I can find all their names right now, that we had here, was a monk named Brother Millerjoy, or Millerjoy, what's his name? And I was really hoping we'd get this cool, like, monk v monk, Brother Millerjoy, yeah. And I was hoping we'd get this cool monk on monk battle, but that didn't really happen. instead they just kind of like ganged up on him, which is probably good because Miller Joy does out-level Phil. At this point, the party's like level 5 or 6-ish, right? But even still, they're out-leveled. There's also, what was the guy's name? Ian Wolf, the fighter. This guy just ended up being a beast. So fortunately, the party had already killed the magic user. He was the guy they found in the stockade, or in the stronghold, separated from the rest. And they'd also managed to kill like I think the cleric as well. So at this point, it's mostly just like some other thieves and assassin types. There's the monk, and then there's this fighter. And Ian Wolf, the fighter, is a 2-weapon fighter style, and of course he has multi-attack, so he's making 3 attacks around at this point, including the offhand attack. And this guy was just a beast. Like, he's just doing truckloads of damage, and the party's having to like use all their magic on healing essentially. The guy's making, like, he didn't even have great saving throws, but he's just boss rolling like every saving throw. They're trying to cast hold person on him and everything else. He's just making everything. He's just like carving up party members. All the other slave lords are like dying one by one around him, and he's just still in there just hacking away. And it just ends up being like the last man standing essentially. So at least he put up a good fight. Some of the others like went down real quick, but he did all right. Oh, another thing I did notice too is that especially compared to the last party, where I mentioned on several videos, these guys did like insane amounts of damage, like just insane amounts of damage. That was not so much the case with this party. Obviously, the rogue does pretty decent damage. The paladin, if she's dropping smites, does pretty good damage. The artificer has some spells, but he's only half caster. He also switched subclass at one point. So at this point, he was a battlesmith, I believe, and he had like the pet thing. A lot of the party members were like pretty strong defensively, but they did not have anywhere near the damage output, which was something I had to start taking into account. Because I kind of felt like I was used to tuning fights for the other party, and it very quickly started becoming apparent when the other party would they'd have some really tough fights, but they would also just crush stuff a lot of times in the Whitespire campaign. Whereas in this campaign, they were never crushing anything, and there were a lot of fights that were like touch and go the whole way through, and I was like, a couple of bad dice rolls, and that might have been a wipe. So I was like, these guys do not seem to be putting out the same amount of damage. Like I said, they did have some nice defensive abilities and stuff, especially with Krogel being a juror wizard and having a shield and stuff. They had a lot of damage absorption power, but they did not do the kind of damage the other group did. Anyways, so that basically concluded the first part of the campaign here. Like I said, this kind of spills a bit into Tier 2, but it's okay. But yeah, they end up getting their freedom from the slave ship, taking down the slavers' operation, having a few side quests here and there, but really just shutting down the slavers. Now granted, is the Broken Lands, and I'm sure the slave lords will be replaced by other slave lords at some point, because, you can destroy this group, but can't really change society necessarily. But either way, they've done some good deeds, and this pretty much ends part 1. Part 2 ends up being a lot more like sandbox stuff as the party starts deciding like what they want to do. Part 2 also has insane amounts of downtime as we discover the joys of the D&D crafting system in detail. Yeah. Insane amounts of downtime. I think this campaign was supposed to start like 7 years after Whitespire, and it probably ends like 15 years after Whitespire. And half of that is not adventuring time. It's literally downtime from the party sitting around in tiny like hamlets and villages while Seven beats away at a forge making like plate mail or something for half the party. I get that D&D was going for like a realistic crafting time based on like medieval stuff. And I'm not saying I blame them, but you're also in a world where people can literally like conjure elementals and transport themselves to other dimensions or teleport anywhere in the world basically. The idea that people could use magic to aid in their crafting and reduce the crafting times considerably should probably be taken account somewhere in the rules. Just saying, instead of making somebody wait like 6 months of downtime just to, make a sword or a suit of armor or something. But anyways, enough complaining about the crafting system. It's fine, it's fine. We just kind of like changed a lot of it and reduced the times because it was just getting insane to me. So I was like, no, we're not spending 2 years here. Like just doing 3 months. But anyways, that's basically everything. Thank you for watching. My next video is going to be another barbarian video as we hopefully finish off the Tasha's barbarian subclasses. I'll probably have another video here for the Broken Lands, probably next week or whatever, about the same time hopefully. And we'll go more into the part 2 stuff, a lot of which was pretty cool. I kind of like I said, a lot of it was sandbox, but a lot of it was when I design like my game worlds, I kind of have ideas of like what's where and everything, and I just kind of like make notes where I'll have like it might be just a sentence, or it might be a paragraph, or it might be an entire page, or multi pages, or whatever. But each place on the map kind of has something associated with it. So then the players are like, hey, I want to get some like crazy sort of magical wood so I can make the rogue a magical crossbow. I'm like, hey, I know where we can do that. I just happen to have a magical forest which is like its own pocket dimension with a bunch of crazy fae outcasts from the Shadow Courts. That sounds like a perfect place to find some sort of enchanted wood. So yeah, anyways, we'll get into that part 2 and all that. But like I said, thank you for watching. Feel free to like, subscribe, comment, ring the bell for notifications, of course. And most importantly, leave me your comments in the comment section. I look forward to reading those all the time. And thank you for watching. Bye.